hi everyone. We have a new guest today. It's Richard Brubaker from Shanghai, China. And I followed him for quite some time on social media, and he's a very entrepreneurial, business savvy person. So I wanted to ask him about what's going on in China and how did the lockdowns affect Chinese. Okay, hi Richard. Good to see
How you
you.
doing? Wow, big topic. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself and your personal adventure in China.
Oh, easy. So my personal adventure started 20 and a half years ago. I flew into Beijing with the idea that I'd be there for about 2 months, study some language, hopefully, master the Mandarin language, get back home, get a nice fat expat salary job, and then be sent back into Asia. I lived in Asia before as part of a study abroad program and really loved it. And then honestly, I just never left until COVID hit. I had my longest stretch of 10 months out. And for the most part, after SARS, I moved to Shanghai. So I've been here since 2003, so almost 20 years in Shanghai. And it's been an amazing adventure. I don't know, I've worn many hats from supply chain to financial to asset management to nonprofit, social entrepreneur, academic. I mean, I've covered a blogger, vlogger, I've covered it all. And I think that's what's been made this place an amazing canvas to explore.
Yeah, not only do we have same names, but I also came to Taiwan 20 years ago. Yeah, so that's
Yeah,
interesting. I know you've been also involved with many startups, and I would say like the regular smaller middle class businesses. Yes, could you maybe talk about this? How has it changed over the last 2 decades? Like since when you came,
wow.
and how is it now? Yeah, is it easier, more difficult? What's different?
Okay, so I mean, big picture, where I started in Beijing, one reason I moved down to Shanghai was that back then you really just had kind of English teachers, Chinese students, and expats, as in like the
Yes,
wealthy expats, like with proper
yes,
jobs, houses out in Shuni. But in Shanghai, it was a much younger group of people who were in business development, who saw things differently, more about themselves, and just constantly networking and constantly coming with ideas and always having 2 or 3 business cards. So inherently, I've always been more drawn towards that group of people. What's changed over the last 20 years is dramatic. I mean, the entrepreneurs and how the speed of the economy has shifted. I mean, there's been a lot of those people I started with who've just blown up and have done amazing things. And you look at most of the Chinese brands that are national and global, those were developed in the last 20 years from a group of entrepreneurs, maybe, 13 like Jack Ma or two like, some others. And within that space, I think there's just been a lot of activity, a lot of shifts always happening. And it always starts off with like this free for all, and then regulations come in and cut the tree back, and then it opens up again, and then it gets cut back. And it's like this ebb and flow. But from the foreign perspective, I would say right now is probably the hardest time to be a foreign entrepreneur in China, because just getting into the country, gaining access to the financials, sorry, getting access to your customers, to your developing a strong business model, getting financial backing is really hard right now. Not just for foreigners, but for all startup entrepreneurs. And so I think like right now, the last 6 months have been kind of difficult. But I think when China opens back up in, I don't know, a year or 5 years from now, who knows, things will improve a little bit. But at the end of the day, I would just say that if you are really committed and you really understand the pain point, there are opportunities. But it's just grown more challenging over the last 20 years. Even as the opportunities have grown, it's just grown more challenging to make the dream happen. But still tons of opportunities.
okay, yes. So that's good to know. And now, so after the lockdowns, a lot of
Mm,
Chinese are leaving, also foreigners are leaving.
yeah.
So,
Yep.
so will it really affect China that much? Like what in percentage wise,
Yeah.
how many expats are leaving or intend to leave within the next year?
Oh, I mean, it depends on which group you believe.
Yes.
My personal estimate is that if schools are not open in August, you will see 75 to 90% of expatriate families leaving. Now, that's because they can't get their kids into school on a stable basis. And keep in mind, Beijing and Shanghai international schools are of the two most expensive in the world. So the average is
Yes.
between 40 and 60,000 US dollars for an education that for many say is not all that amazing. So if you're having that problem, you going to Thailand, going to Singapore, going back to the EU, going back to the US, these are on the cards for a lot of people. Now, even before that, I would estimate you're looking at 40, 50% of families leaving. And I say families because I know that group better. And honestly, in the last couple of weeks, I've been told by about 12 to 15 families are leaving. And every day there's moving trucks in my compound moving families out. And it's it's unlike anything I've ever seen before. You're seeing groups of children like 30, 40, 50 out in the middle of the compound go down to, like dramatically reducing every day, and visibly the compound is changing. So, that's Shanghai. That's the Shanghai experience. I would say if you're a young professional, like you're 27 to 35, and you speak really good Chinese and you're committed to the country, this is a great place to be because there's going to be so many jobs available for that group. But for families, that one will be disproportionately hurt. And to your other question, what will be the impact of China? I think this is what people are talking a lot about. I think a lot of the high quality investments will be lost or at least stalled. I believe that you will see a lot of the IP generation slow down because you have one, not just the people leaving, but just the people not willing to come into China, and that's foreigners and Chinese. I mean, everyone thinks it's the foreigners leaving. No, it's a mix, and it's people who can and have the access to leaving. They will, and yes, that will be disproportionately Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, tier one, tier two cities. But those cities are very important in terms of the wider macroeconomic, wider macro investment story for China. And also for the manufacturing landscape, China is going to be the loser, not because they are losers, but because they were on top, and the only way that this is going to go for them is down. And the reality is, what will happen is a lot of firms will rebalance out of China, not to leave the China market. They'll keep manufacturing in China for China, and this was always part of the plan. But now you'll see an expedited kind of shift towards Southeast Asia, maybe 10, 20%, US 10, 20%, or at least North America 10, 20%, and then Eastern Europe, Western Europe 10, 20%. And so there'll just be a bit of a reshuffling. And that would be true if we were talking about Brazil and we are too reliant upon Brazil, or we are too reliant upon the country of Chad. It doesn't matter. What happened was people realized you're too reliant upon one single supply chain, one single pool, and you need to get away from that as fast as possible. And so, yeah, it's going to be for the short term difficult for China to recover from these issues. The question is going to be like, what do they want to do longer term or more medium term to make this a more balanced picture in their cities, but also in their wider economy?
But I can imagine the government knew this is how it would end up. So they didn't care or what? Or, I mean,
Well, I think
obviously many
didn't
people would
care.
just vote with their feet.
I think didn't care is that's a I don't necessarily buy that, but I do believe they knew that there were costs and they made a risk calculation against those costs. Now, is what's happening what they expected? And are they happy with it? That I think is separate, and that leads into whether or not they care or they don't. I think there were so many unknowns and there were so many challenges when it came to making the decision for lockdowns and things like this. I've been saying this for quite a while. They have no good decisions. They risk the whole economy, or they risk part of the economy, and they risk a large group of elderly. They risk the economy. Like there was all these really bad decisions, and I think that they knew what the risks were, and they just kind of hoped that they wouldn't come to bear, but they are. And so that's why I say, like, the question for me now is like, what are they going to do to kind of give people confidence that they've got this under control, or that there's a plan, so that people can then, with their feet, as you said, vote with your feet,
Yes.
make investment decisions. Because honestly, if you don't believe, and I saw this when they were announcing that there would not be a lockdown, what would happen was all the elderly would run on the vegetable markets because they just knew that's a sign I need to protect myself. I'm going to vote to protect myself in areas where I have control. And I think the business community is doing the exact same. I went to my WeWork yesterday. It's amazing how many people have left the WeWorks. And That's going to be true of all co-shared spaces. And this was fractional tenancy. So, these were the lower end payments. These were easy payments to make, but because the subsidies weren't there like they were in 2020, because landlords weren't really supportive, they extracted as much as they could. Because you couldn't even issue, like, there was all these things they did not consider and are now bearing fruit in ways they didn't know existed. So part of me is like, they made a risk calculation. I'd like to think that they had it right. I don't understand how they did, but they're going to have to, move past that and figure out what are they going to do to attract investors, foreign and Chinese, because as much as the foreign investment is stalled, and I think the U.S. Ambassador said, U.S. investors are now really scared off. They said that publicly. The Chinese investors, the Chinese entrepreneurs I know are just saying, like, look, I'm not going to, I'm going to scale down my team. I'm going to scale down my office. I'm going to scale down my ambitions. I'm going to invest overseas and I'm going to rebalance my exposure because they learn through this experience that they are out. They have no control over their
Yes.
ability to leave their house. So why, in things they have control over, why would they create more exposure to that risk? And the answer is they won't. They will rebalance. They still believe long term in China. I think that is very true. Even the entrepreneurs I know that want to leave, it's a very difficult decision because they see a bright future for China, but it's just not right now. It's too painful.
That's interesting because somehow it sounds a bit contradictory because you said they would kind of catch up or make it up, but on the other hand, you're saying that the trust is gone. So those people who move out, they wouldn't probably come back because the reason they moved out in the first place is because they didn't trust the government anymore or the authorities, or they were too harsh. So in the end, it might be more a loss for the economy.
I think in the short term, the economic impact will be real. And that's why I keep saying, like, the medium to long term, I think that's the question mark for me. Will they be able to bring these people back? And I don't think that trust is lost. I think what happened is the balance between trust and agency is being reshuffled. Where you can control your risk and where you can control your activity, you are now much more likely to focus on that in the short term, make sure you're stable in every other place so that when you take risk, you're taking risks that you better understand, you're better prepared for, you're better structured for. And that's healthy, actually. But it's just unhealthy for China and China's economy in the short term because it was the number two market in the world. It was the number one manufacturing space for a lot of brands. It was all these top numbers. So it's only going to be coming down. Will it come down 5%? Will it come down 10%? Does 10% matter? Like, if we're losing low cost investment and low yielding investment, maybe they're better off for it. But I think that comes into the question, like, what do they do medium long term to regain this status and to regain the attraction to the market? And if they can do that, I think, yeah, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the road, they'll be better off for this time. But for right now, it is going to be, it'll be painful for the next 12 to 18 months because they still haven't even gone through COVID. They still have to let the whole population either get vaccinated or get COVID. And we've seen what happened around the world. Every country struggled with that time for 12 to 18 months. So, yeah, a lot of people, they will shift out of China, like they shifted out of New York City, like they shifted out of London. They're just going to shift out of the country here if they can, or out of the cities of China into the countryside of China. Like they're going to make their own bets where they have agency, and that will hurt the economy for sure.
Okay, so you've been to Taipei. What's your
Yeah.
like? How do you compare Taipei versus
Oh.
Shanghai, and like what are the advantages, disadvantages, like in terms of living
Mm.
and business wise?
Oh yeah. Well, first off, Taipei is an amazing city.
Where
I
have
had
when have you
very
been here the last time?
oh geez, I think it's been 4 years. I think it's 2018.
Oh,
And
so
I've only been,
it's really changed a lot. Probably not as fast as China, but I
yeah.
remember downtown, the whole city has changed tremendously for the better.
Yeah, oh, I mean, it's an
I like it
amazing
much
city.
more now than when I arrived here.
Oh, did you? And
Yeah,
you've been there for a long time, right? So
it's really
it's
a metropolitan city, like really, really
yeah.
cool place.
Well, and I'd say that Shanghai's done much the same, but they're different, obviously. But when I visited Taipei the first time was probably 2013, 14, somewhere in there. I had actually very low expectations, but it was like the biggest shocker for me. It was the surprise of all the cities I've been to. And I traveled everywhere in Asia, right? But I was just expecting like just a rural version of Hong Kong. And of course, this was just my own not knowing anything about the city before I did. And I showed up, I was like, wow, like because I lived in Japan in the 90s. And so I could see the Japanese flavor, but then I could see the attention to detail. I could just see like so many things were happening there that were so interesting. And they had this balance between the city and the environment and like the lifestyle. So it reminded me a lot of like Singapore in a way. So
Okay.
I always went to references of other cities, but it was just it's a very unique place. It's very affordable, and I have a
Yes.
number of friends that live there, and they love the balance of lifestyle. Um, I will say that my entrepreneur friends who started in the mainland as foreigners and try to go to Taipei, they don't like it as much from a business standpoint. It's very difficult in their mind, and I don't know why. Like I this is just from having lunches with
Yes.
friends who
Yes.
talk about investing in Taipei and how hard it is to do that. And so that for me was really interesting because I kind of feel like Singapore, Hong Kong, and Taipei, they should be open, like just open to anything because that would help their economy grow to the highest quality in terms of investors and innovation and ideas. And the market could just kick the low performers out. They don't need to have such high bars. But what I find is Taipei, in that sense, is no different than Hong Kong and Singapore now. It's very difficult if you want to be an investor. But if you have a
Yes.
brand already, it's okay.
The
But
government talks a lot about attracting foreign talent, but in practice, it doesn't look that good. Like,
yeah,
the paperwork and some bureaucracy now, quarantine. So it's actually difficult. Yeah, and the
it's
banks
actually
are
difficult.
very old-fashioned.
And I would say honestly, like I have so many discussions around this with my friends around the world. Like globalization has peaked, and what many governments want is for you to just go home. And that's China, that's Singapore, that's Taipei, that's Japan, that's Europe. It just that's the US. We are really we've gone through a time from the 70s to maybe the mid 20 teens where we were really open overall borders. That's really changing. And I think the economy shifted, politics has shifted. It's a generational thing, and I hope this doesn't last long because I do feel that the cities benefit from having open borders, but that's just kind of where we are right now. And even if you could get all the paperwork done in Taipei, try and get bank accounts as an American or as a
Yes,
European in Asia
that's
right now.
true.
It's impossible. So you can't even functionally do it, and it's that there's so many borders and barriers and things in between. So it's a shame. I've heard great things about Taipei. I know a lot of people have considered Taipei moving from Shanghai, but the only ones who are actively doing it are those with Taiwanese cards or that they grew up in Taipei because
Yeah,
they
it's
have all
so
the
bad
infrastructure there.
here with regards to the banks that I know foreigners who have their bank accounts in Hong Kong because
Mm,
it's easier and less restricted.
yeah, but even that's hard. I mean, if you're a HSBC or Standard Chartered client and you're from the US or EU, it's very hard to get a bank account now. Like if you have an account, you get audited every year, but if you don't have one, good luck getting one.